Hello, this segment is on writing conclusions for hypothesis tests of proportions by Silvana Vester. Now, when you're going to write these conclusions, you really have to be careful as you're reading the problems, really decide what is the trait, that's what it is you're actually tracking, what's the population, that's any person or object that could possess the trait, not necessarily that they do, but could. And the relationship that's usually stated, well, it's always stated in the problem, whether you're looking for greater than, lesser than, or different from. Now, I'm providing here a sentence structure that's a bit formulaic. You can deviate from this, of course. This is just a suggestion when you're first learning how to write these conclusions. If you end up rejecting the no, the basic structure would be there is strong evidence that the, and then you insert population, write down the verb form of the trait, and then add a greater or lesser or different, again that depends on what the problem states, rate than the percent in the hypothesis. Now obviously we're going to go through several examples about this, but I want you to notice that there's really almost no difference between the sentence when you write reject the null versus do not reject the null. When you do not reject the null, the only difference is that you say there's not enough evidence as opposed to there is strong evidence. Everything else remains the same, that the population, verb form of the trait, at a greater or lesser or different rate than the percent in the hypothesis. So let's go through some examples. Example 1. A company with a fleet of trucks strives to keep its vehicles operating within state requirements for emission standards. A recent simple random sample found that 7 out of the 50 trucks to be out of compliance. Does this provide evidence that more than 10% of the company's vehicles do not meet the state's emission standards requirements? Now, what you're looking for, the trait is, you're wondering if they do not meet emission standards. That's the trait. The population are the company's vehicles. And the relationship is given by this keyword more than. And by the way, in your hypotheses, you would write then P equal to 10%. Again, there's your rate. Or P is greater than 10% because of the more than. So, given the trait that is do not meet emission standards, or you could say out of compliance, the company's truck says the population and the relationship is greater than or more than. Here's how you would write your sentence if you rejected the null. And what we're going to do is just insert what you see here. So there is strong evidence that in the population then is the company's trucks. The verb form of the trait is do not meet emission standards. And then at a greater, in this case because of the word more than, rate than the 10% given in the hypothesis. Okay. Now if you were to write this sentence, if you had to reject the null, then you would write, there is not enough evidence that the population, that's the company's trucks, again, the verb form of the trait, do not meet emission standards at a greater rate than 10% in the hypothesis. Example 2. A garden center has to decide whether to sell its current leftover seed packets or to store them for the next year. So the garden center suspects that the seeds may lose some of their ability to germinate over time, so they test a packet of seeds left over from last year. And the packet claims that there's a 95% germination rate, but only 270 out of the 300 seeds germinate. Is this evidence that the 1-year-old seeds germinate at a rate less than the packet's stated germination rate? Okay, so the trait is whether the seeds germinate. That's the trait. The population are the 1-year-old seeds. There's your population. And the relationship is less than. And the percent that you're going to use is the 95% given. So if you were to write your hypotheses, you would write P equal to 95%, or is it less than 95%? Okay. And using what we just found, if we were to reject the null, we would say there is strong evidence that the 1-year-old seeds germinate at a lesser rate than 95%. And again, we're just plugging in like a little cartridge There is strong evidence that the population, that would be the one-year-old seeds, verb form of the trait, germinate at a lesser in this case because of the word less than, and there's the percent. And if you were not going to reject the null, again, there's only one small difference. Instead of saying there is strong evidence, you would say there's not enough evidence, but the rest of the sentence stays the same. There's not enough evidence that the one-year-old seeds germinate at a lesser rate than 95%. And example 3, in 2000, 5% of Americans were on food stamps. In a recent simple random sample of 1,000 American adults, 120 said they were on food stamps. Is this evidence that the proportion of Americans on food stamps has changed? Okay, so the trait is whether someone is on food stamps or not. An American is on food stamps. The population are the American adults. Population here, this is our trait. And we're wondering if these things have changed. So that's the relationship, different from. And again, the percent we're going to be using is 5%. So in our hypothesis, we would write P equal to 5% versus has this changed or is it different from? Okay. So our sentences, depending on whether we end up rejecting or not. If we reject, we would say there is strong evidence that American adults are on food stamps at a different rate than 5%. If we do not reject the null, then we would write there is not enough evidence that American adults are on food stamps at a different rate than 5%. Now, I just want to point out, of course, this is a bit formulaic. It's really to help you out when you're starting to write your conclusions. Here are some examples of non-formulaic ways of writing the reject the null conclusions for the previous examples. So you could say there is strong evidence that more than 10% of the company's trucks do not meet emission standards. Or for the second example, you could have written for the reject the null, there is strong evidence that fewer than 95% of the seeds germinate 1 year later. And for the third example, you could have written for the reject the null, there is strong evidence that the percent of American adults on food stamps has changed from its previous 5% rate. Well, thank you very much for listening.